My name is Alara Vance, and I am 34 years old. Tonight was meant to be a simple, if quietly dreaded, dinner at my parents' home in Seacliff, Oregon. The call had come from my mother last week, her voice a soft, familiar tapestry of hope and anxiety. After nearly 4 years of carefully maintained distance from my father, I had reluctantly agreed to join them for what she described as a pivotal business dinner. It was a favor, she'd said, a simple show of family unity. I arrived in a charcoal gray silk blouse and tailored trousers, my leather portfolio tucked under my arm, a uniform of quiet competence I had spent a decade perfecting. The scent of pine and salt hung in the damp evening air, a fragrance so deeply entwined with my childhood that it felt like a ghost on my skin. As I stepped into the warm light of the foyer, my father's face, a landscape I knew better than my own, shifted from a practiced host's smile to a mask of sheer panic. "Alara," he hissed, his voice a low, urgent whisper as he physically blocked my path. He glanced nervously toward the dining room, where the clink of silverware could be heard. "This isn't a good time. I need you to wait in the car. These investors are particular." He tried to soften the command with a strained, placating smile. "We need this deal." A familiar, weary ache settled in my chest. If only he knew who I truly was. Before I unravel the strange tapestry of that evening, let me take you back. My childhood home, a sprawling cedar-shingled house perched on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, always felt more like a monument to my father's ambition than a family sanctuary. Arthur Vance had built his company, Vance Innovations, from a garage workshop into a respectable, if now dated, hardware firm. This creation story was the gospel of our household, a narrative he recited with the solemnity of a prayer. Our dining room table, a great slab of Oregon oak, was more frequently a battlefield of blueprints and financial projections than a gathering place for shared meals. When we did eat together, the conversation orbited my father's world of circuit boards, patent filings, and market share. My mother, Helen, moved through our lives like a gentle tide, arranging driftwood and sea glass on the mantelpiece, her quiet presence a constant, soothing counterpoint to my father's restless energy. "Your father is building something important, Ellie," she would say, her hand a light touch on my shoulder. "He's doing it for all of us." I stopped believing that around the age of 13, when I realized he was doing it for the roar of his own engine, for the validation that our quiet admiration could never provide. My brother, Liam, older by 5 years, was the heir apparent. He was a reflection of our father's mind, possessing a natural fluency in the languages of code and logic. By 16, Liam was designing firmware that made our father's eyes shine with a fierce, proprietary pride. "That's my boy," he'd boom, clapping Liam on the back while I sat at the same table, a silent spectator to their bond. It wasn't that I lacked an aptitude for it. The intricate world of technology fascinated me, a universe of infinite puzzles waiting to be solved. But my attempts to join their technical discourse were met with an indulgent, dismissive pat on the head. "Why don't you go help your mother with the garden, Ellie?" my father would say, his smile kind but his message clear. "This is complicated stuff." When I was 17, I spent an entire summer saving up for parts, and with the help of online tutorials, I built a small, programmable robot. It was a clumsy thing of wires and servos, but it was mine. I called my father into the garage, my heart thrumming with a desperate need for his approval. He watched it scuttle across the concrete floor for less than a minute. "That's clever, honey," he'd said, before turning his attention to a schematic Liam had taped to the wall. "Now, Liam, about this power supply issue." That night, a quiet resolve solidified within me. I would follow this path, but I would walk it alone on my own terms. I maintained the fiction that I was pursuing a literature degree at the University of Washington, a choice my father deemed suitable. In reality, I was double majoring in software engineering and business. I worked with a ferocity born of isolation, knowing I had no safety net. Every late night in the computer lab, every complex problem solved, was a brick I laid in the foundation of a life he couldn't imagine for me. On the day of my graduation, as I walked across the stage to receive a diploma that read Bachelor of Science in Software Engineering, my father's expression was a slow storm gathering. The celebratory dinner that followed was thick with unspoken tension. "You lied to us for 4 years?" he finally asked, his voice low and tight with betrayal. "I didn't lie," I replied, my own voice surprisingly steady. "I simply didn't correct your assumptions." "And what's the plan now?" he scoffed, the disbelief curdling into condescension. "You'll spend years fighting for a foothold in a field where you're at a constant disadvantage. You could have had a place at Vance Innovations." I had already accepted a junior developer position at Lumina Tech, one of his more agile competitors. Their focus on cloud-based solutions and user-centric design excited me in a way his legacy hardware never could. When I told him, he didn't laugh, but he gave a patronizing side that was somehow worse. "Lumina? They chase fads, Ellie. It's all ephemeral. You'll be making coffee for the real engineers within a year when they realize you're out of your depth." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Liam stared at his plate, a silent accomplice. In that moment, the delicate thread connecting my father and me finally snapped. "I guess we'll see" was all I could manage before I stood up and walked out of the restaurant, leaving my uneaten dessert on the table. For the next 4 years, my contact was a carefully curated stream of brief calls with my mother and occasional, surface-level texts with Liam. I poured my life's energy into my career at Lumina. I started on the bottom rung, but my work spoke for itself. My innovations, my ability to see around corners and anticipate market shifts, didn't go unnoticed. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and a relentless drive to prove not him wrong, but myself right. The promotions came steadily: senior developer, then project lead within 2 years. Director of product strategy a year after that, and then vice president of innovation. Each step was a quiet affirmation of what I had always known: I belonged here. Meanwhile, through my mother's carefully worded updates, I knew that Vance Innovations was floundering. My father, stubborn and proud, had refused to pivot. He clung to his tangible hardware in an industry that had dematerialized into the cloud. Liam, I gathered, had tried to push for change, but his suggestions were met with the same paternalistic dismissal I knew so well. Then came last week's call from my mother. "Your father has a dinner," she'd said, her voice frayed, "with some very important investors. It's critical, Alara. The company might not survive without this funding." "What does that have to do with me?" I asked, my eyes scanning quarterly projections on a second monitor. "He wants you there. For a united family front." "Please, Ellie. For me." I should have probed deeper. I should have asked for the names of these mysterious investors. But I was drowning in the transition to my new role, a promotion I had not yet shared with my family, and I agreed just to end the conversation, to silence the pleading in her voice. "Fine, Mom. Text me the details. But I'm not playing happy family." "Thank you, my love," she'd breathed, the relief in her voice a palpable thing. "It means more than you know." And that is how I found myself, after 4 years, driving back up the familiar gravel driveway, about to walk into a business dinner that was destined to unravel everything. The quiet sting of my father's dismissal was a familiar sensation, a ghost pain from a wound that had never fully healed. I retreated down the 3 stone steps from the front porch, his words, "I need you to wait in the car," echoing in the misty air. Through the large bay window, I could see the dining room. The table was set with my mother's wedding china, 6 places arranged with meticulous care. My mother caught my eye for a fleeting, apologetic second before she turned away, her shoulders slumping as she disappeared toward the kitchen. I stood in the driveway, the cool metal of my car keys a sharp pressure in my palm. A part of me, the 17-year-old girl who had so desperately wanted his praise, felt the pull of obedience. But the woman I had become, the executive who had navigated contentious boardrooms and spearheaded multi-million-dollar projects, felt a quiet, steely resolve. Unbelievable, I murmured, unlocking my car and sliding into the driver's seat. I had carved out this evening from the most demanding week of my professional life, and he had exiled me to the driveway. The cool leather of the seat was a balm to my frustration. I pulled out my phone, deciding to reclaim the time. If I was to be banished, I might as well be productive. 36 new emails had arrived in the hour since I'd left my Portland office. I began scrolling, my thumbs flying across the screen, triaging the urgent from the merely important. My new assistant had confirmed the final schedule for my transition briefings. The legal team needed my signature on the revised terms for a small but strategic acquisition in Seattle. A banner notification slid down from the top of my screen. It was a message from Julian Croft, the visionary CEO of Lumina Tech and the man who had just appointed me his successor as president. Running 10 minutes behind for the Vance meeting. Portland traffic is a beast. The founder is apparently traditional, but the core tech has potential. Give me the short version of our angle before I walk in. I froze, my thumb hovering over the screen. I read the message again, the name Vance leaping out at me. A coincidence of this magnitude felt impossible, yet the timing, the location, it all aligned with a terrifying precision. My fingers, suddenly clumsy, typed a reply. Julian, to confirm, you're meeting with Arthur Vance of Vance Innovations tonight? His response was almost instantaneous. The very one. A small legacy hardware company. Their new encryption protocol, however, could be the key to our cybersecurity government contract. Why? Do you know them? My hands were trembling slightly. The sheer, wild irony of it was a physical force, a wave of dizziness. I took a deep breath before typing back. Arthur Vance is my father. I'm currently sitting in his driveway. He asked me to wait in the car so I wouldn't disrupt your meeting. He has no idea I'm the new president of Lumina. The 3 pulsing dots that indicated he was typing appeared and disappeared several times. Finally, his message came through. Well, this is unexpected. Stay exactly where you are. I'm arriving in 5. We will navigate this with grace. I set my phone down on the passenger seat and stared through the windshield at the house where I'd grown up. It seemed the universe had a flair for dramatic storytelling. My father had been desperately courting an investment from the very company he had once so derisively dismissed. And now I, the daughter he had deemed unfit for the world of technology, held the authority to decide the future of his life's work. I watched the winding coastal road for Julian's car, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions stirring within me. Professional ethics demanded that I evaluate Vance Innovations' technology on its objective merits, free from personal history. But the human part of me, the part that still carried the phantom limb of old hurts, savored the impending revelation with a grim satisfaction. A sleek, dark sedan I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. The passenger door opened, and Sophia Reyes, Lumina's brilliant head of strategy, stepped out. Sophia had been my first mentor at the company, a sharp, intuitive leader who had seen my potential long before I held any official power. Seeing her here, striding toward my parents' front door with her customary confidence, galvanized my decision. I was not going to wait in the car like a reprimanded child. I was going to walk back into that house as Alara Vance, president of Lumina Tech. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, touched up my lipstick with a steady hand, and stepped out of the car. As I walked toward the front door for the second time that evening, I squared my shoulders and lifted my chin. This time, there would be no dismissal. I timed my entrance with a precision honed in countless high-stakes meetings, slipping through the door just behind Sophia as the housekeeper welcomed her in. My father stood in the foyer, his hand extended, the practiced smile of a seasoned businessman firmly in place. Ms. Reyes, a pleasure to have you in our home. We are so honored you could. His voice trailed off as his eyes landed on me, standing just behind Sophia's shoulder. The smile faltered, a flicker of panic in his eyes before he masked it with a veneer of irritation. Alara, I thought I asked you to. Sophia turned, her expression one of genuine surprise. "Alara, I had no idea you'd be here." Before I could reply, my father stepped forward, attempting to manage the situation. My daughter was just on her way out. A prior commitment, unfortunately. He shot me a look that was both a plea and a command. "Right, Alara?" I met his gaze and then stepped around him, extending my hand to my colleague. "Actually, I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said, my voice calm and deliberate. "I wouldn't miss this dinner for the world." Sophia's astute eyes darted between my father and me, sensing the deep, unspoken current of tension, but maintaining her professional composure. My father's jaw tightened. He had been outmaneuvered, and he knew it. "Well then," he said, his tone clipped. "Come in." He gestured stiffly toward the dining room, where my mother and Liam were seated with another man I didn't recognize, one of the venture partners, I presumed. My mother's eyes widened as I entered. Liam looked from me to our father, his expression a question mark. The stranger, a man with a warm, intelligent face, rose politely as Sophia and I approached. "This is my daughter, Alara," my father said, the introduction a masterpiece of minimization. She was in the neighborhood. "And this is my son, Liam, who heads our development." The emphasis he placed on son and development while glossing over my presence was a familiar, painful refrain. David Chen, the man, introduced himself with a firm handshake. "Pleased to meet you." We took our seats. My father was visibly agitated by my presence, but trapped by the demands of hospitality. My mother began nervously passing around a platter of Dungeness crab cakes while my father launched into his pitch, a well-rehearsed ode to the 25-year history of Vance Innovations. "We have always prioritized robust, reliable hardware," he declared, sliding glossy brochures across the polished oak table. "While other companies chased fleeting trends, we remained committed to quality and security." Liam nodded at the appropriate moments, interjecting with technical specifications that seemed to pique the interest of Sophia and David. I remained silent, a quiet observer, noting how my father framed the company's failure to adapt as a virtuous adherence to principle. "Our latest security protocol is a true breakthrough in asymmetric encryption," my father continued. "Liam, perhaps you could explain the architecture to our guests." As Liam began to detail the protocol, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu. I recognized the core concepts ideas from a paper I had written in my final year of university, ideas I had once tried to share with a father who had no interest in listening. Sophia, ever perceptive, caught my eye. "Alara, what are your thoughts? Does this approach seem viable in the current market?" The table fell silent. My father's expression tightened into a thunderous frown. "Alara isn't involved in the technical side of the business." "Actually," I said, placing my water glass down with a quiet click, "the core concept is sound, but it's not unique. At least 2 of our competitors have deployed similar protocols in the last year. The real challenge and the real value lies in its seamless integration with a multi-cloud environment." Liam looked at me, a flicker of surprise and respect in his eyes. "You've been following encryption trends?" "You could say that," I replied, my gaze holding his, deliberately avoiding our father's darkening face. The doorbell chimed, a welcome interruption that seemed to visibly relieve my father. He excused himself to greet the final, most important guest, Julian. My mother seized the opportunity to escape to the kitchen. Liam leaned toward me, his voice a low whisper. "What are you doing, Ellie?" "Dad has been pinning everything on this deal. I'm giving them an honest assessment of the technology," I whispered back. "Isn't that what investors deserve?" Sophia overheard and arched a single, elegant eyebrow, but said nothing. From the foyer, we could hear my father's voice, now booming with an almost desperate enthusiasm. "Mr. Croft, we are absolutely delighted you could make it. I trust the drive from Portland wasn't too troublesome." "Not at all," came Julian's smooth, familiar voice. "Sometimes the coast offers a welcome change of pace." They entered the dining room, my father leading the way. Julian's attention was initially on greeting Sophia and David. Then his gaze swept the table and landed on me. For a fraction of a second, his composure broke, his eyes widening in what I knew was genuine shock, despite his preparedness. He recovered instantly, but what he did next sent a seismic shock through the room. Julian Croft, the celebrated CEO of Lumina Tech, one of the most respected figures in the industry, stopped, straightened his tie, and gave a slight, deferential nod in my direction. "Alara," he said, his tone imbued with a quiet, unmistakable respect. "I should have known we'd find you wherever true innovation is happening." A profound silence descended upon the room. My father stood frozen beside Julian, his expression a rapid-fire sequence of confusion, disbelief, and a slow, dawning horror. My mother, who had just returned from the kitchen carrying a salad bowl, stopped dead in her tracks. "I'm sorry," my father finally choked out, his voice thin and strained. "I believe there's been some mistake. This is my daughter, Alara." Julian looked from my father to me, his expression one of polite curiosity. "Yes, of course. Alara Vance, the newly appointed president of Lumina Technologies." He turned to me with an apologetic smile. "I apologize for not making the connection between Vance Innovations and your family name. It should have been obvious." Every eye in the room swiveled to me. David Chin set down his wine glass with deliberate care. Sophia's lips curved into a subtle, almost imperceptible smile of satisfaction. Liam was staring at me as if I were a stranger he'd never met. "President," my father repeated, the word sounding alien and absurd on his tongue. I held his gaze, my own composure a placid lake, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. The internal announcement was last week. The press release is slated for Monday. My father sank slowly into the nearest empty chair, his hand gripping the back of it for support. The man who had dismissed me to the driveway only an hour before now looked as though the very ground had given way beneath him. "You're the president of Lumina?" he whispered. "Our competitor?" "Yes," I said simply. The memory of my graduation dinner flashed in my mind, his patronizing sigh, his prediction that I'd be making coffee within a year. The gulf between that moment and this one was immense, almost comical. "Why didn't you tell us?" my mother asked, finally finding her voice as she placed the salad bowl on the table with a thud. Would it have made a difference? The question was quiet, but it held the weight of years. Dad made his opinion of my abilities quite clear a long time ago. Liam leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his eyes wide with a new understanding. "You've been at Lumina this whole time? Working your way up?" "I started as a junior developer," I confirmed. "Then lead, director, VP, and now president. It's been a busy 4 years." Julian, ever the diplomat, cleared his throat. "Alara has been a driving force behind Lumina's growth," he stated, addressing the stunned table. "Our market cap has more than quadrupled since she joined us, in large part due to product lines she conceived and led." The color drained from my father's face. I remembered his dismissal of Lumina as a company that chased fads. Now he was being told that his own daughter was the architect of its staggering success. David Chin, the venture capitalist who had been a silent observer to our family drama, finally spoke, his voice cutting through the tension. "Well," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "This certainly reframes the evening's discussion." He turned his full attention to me. "I assume, then, that you're intimately familiar with your father's proposal?" "Actually, no," I replied truthfully. "I was only invited this afternoon as a guest. I wasn't aware that Lumina was the potential investor until Julian messaged me from his car." "Fascinating," David murmured, his gaze moving between my father and me with the keen eye of a man who evaluated people as much as business plans. My mother, the eternal peacemaker, tried to restore some semblance of normalcy. "Well, why don't we eat? I've made salmon." Sophia exchanged a quick, meaningful glance with Julian before addressing my father. "Mr. Vance, given this development, perhaps it would be best to reschedule." My father seemed to shrink in his chair. The confident patriarch had vanished, replaced by a man utterly lost at sea. "Yes, of course," he stammered. Whatever you think is best. The power in the room had not just shifted, it had undergone a tectonic upheaval. The investors who had come to sit in judgment of my father's company were now deferring to me. The daughter told to wait in the car was now, for all intents and purposes, running the meeting. Julian, with his innate grace, smoothed over the moment. I think we should proceed with dinner. Helen has gone to great trouble, and the technology itself deserves a fair hearing. He looked to me for the final decision. I met his gaze and nodded. I agree. We're all professionals here. As my mother began to serve the salmon, the conversation resumed, but it was fundamentally altered. Questions that would have been directed at my father were now aimed at me. David wanted my take on the future of cybersecurity in the government sector. Sophia asked about potential integration challenges with Lumina's existing platforms. Even Liam began directing his technical explanations to me, seeking my validation. Through it all, my father remained mostly silent, a ghost at his own table. He watched me, his expression a mixture of shock, confusion, and something I couldn't quite name. He was studying me, truly seeing me, perhaps for the very first time. When dessert, a Marionberry pie, my childhood favorite, was served, my father finally spoke again, his voice raspy. So, you're actually writing code? Leading the engineering teams? Not just managing? The question revealed the depths of his misunderstanding, the narrow box he had placed me in. I hold 4 patents in my name for Lumina. Dad, I said gently. I came up through the engineering track. I can't lead innovators if I don't understand innovation. He nodded slowly, the information settling like a heavy weight. I had no idea, he said, his voice barely a whisper. It was the closest he had ever come to admitting he was wrong. As coffee was being poured, the conversation circled back to the reason we were all there, the future of Vance Innovations. But now, there was no question as to who was at the head of the table. Let's talk about the proposal, I said, looking directly at my father. I'd like to hear exactly what you're looking for from us. The dining room, with its scent of old wood and beeswax, transformed into an impromptu boardroom. My father, with visible reluctance, began to lay out the details of their proposal. His usual commanding tone was gone, replaced by a hesitant, almost pleading quality I had never heard from him. He kept glancing at me, searching my expression for a sign. We're seeking a strategic investment, he began, pushing a thin folder across the table toward me, not Julian. $3 million to scale the production and marketing of the new protocol. We project capturing a significant share of the federal security market within 2 years. I opened the folder. The numbers were optimistic. The projections were based on a market that no longer existed. These estimates seemed to ignore the market's shift to subscription-based cloud services, I observed gently. Your entire model is built around hardware sales and licensing. My father bristled. Our clients are government agencies. They demand physical, on-premise security. 5 years ago, they did, I countered. But the directive has changed. The intelligence community is aggressively migrating to secure, hybrid cloud environments. Your protocol, as it's designed, isn't compatible with that architecture. Liam jumped in, his tone more collaborative than defensive. She's right, Dad. I've been trying to make the case for a cloud-native version, but we don't have the infrastructure or the expertise. The admission, made in front of investors, was a clear sign of his own desperation. The tension in my father's jaw was a clear signal of his fury at being undermined by both his children. I could have pressed the point, dismantled his entire business philosophy piece by piece, but it would have felt cruel. This was business, not revenge. The encryption algorithm itself has merit, I conceded, turning to my brother. The way you've approached quantum resistance is elegant, Liam. Truly. It's the framework around it that's the issue. Julian, who had been listening intently, spoke up. What would you propose, Alara? We would need to decouple the algorithm from the hardware, I explained. Rebuild it as a microservice that could be integrated into our Lumina Sentinel platform. Essentially, We'd be acquiring the intellectual property and the core engineering talent, not the existing business. My father's face went pale. So you'd gut the company? Take the one valuable piece my son built and discard the rest. The words were laced with bitterness, but also a startling, indirect admission. It was Liam's work, not his, that held the value. I'm evaluating this as a potential acquisition, I said, keeping my voice level and professional. I'm identifying the assets that align with our strategic goals. David Chin leaned forward, his expression analytical. It sounds less like an investment and more like an acqui-hire. The core IP is valuable, but the company, as a going concern, seems to have a limited future. My father's face flushed. Vance Innovations has been a respected name in this industry for 25 years. We are not for sale. Dad, Liam said, his voice quiet but firm. We have to be realistic. We've been losing ground for 3 years straight. We have 6 months of operating capital left, at best. It was the first I had heard of how dire things truly were. My mother's worried glance confirmed it. This dinner wasn't for growth. It was a desperate, last-ditch effort to avoid bankruptcy. I took a moment, letting the weight of the situation settle in the room. As I see it, I said finally, there are 2 potential paths. 1, Lumina acquires the intellectual property and offers key personnel positions on our team. 2, we pass on the opportunity and Vance Innovations likely ceases operations within the year. My clinical summary hung in the air, brutal in its honesty. The man who had built this company from nothing was now listening to his daughter calmly lay out the terms of its demise. Is there no option where the company survives? He asked, his voice hollow. I met his gaze. The technology can survive, Dad. The algorithm can have a future. But the company, the business model you built for a different era. I don't believe it's viable. A thick, heavy silence descended. My father's hands were clenched into fists on the table. For a moment, I saw the man I remembered proud, unbending, and quick to anger. I expected an explosion. Instead, he asked a question that stunned me with its vulnerability. What would happen to my people? The employees who have been with me for decades? It was a question not about his own pride, but about his responsibility to others. In an acquisition, we would conduct a thorough review, I explained. The engineering team, especially those who worked on the protocol, would almost certainly be offered positions. For redundant roles, we would provide generous severance packages. And me? He asked, the question seeming to suck all the air from the room. A father asking his daughter to define his professional fate. That would depend on what you wanted, Dad, I answered, my voice softening. We could create a transitional advisory role. Or, if you were ready to retire, we would structure a deal that honors the legacy of the company you built. He nodded slowly, processing. He looked at the faces around the table, at Julian's calm neutrality, at Liam's hopeful anxiety, and finally, back at me. I need a moment, he said, pushing his chair back. Excuse me. He walked out of the dining room, not toward his study, but toward the back porch that overlooked the dark, churning ocean. I felt the pull of 2 opposing duties, to stay and finalize the business, or to follow him and face the personal wreckage that lay between us. Julian caught my eye and gave a slight, understanding nod. Take your time, Alara, he said quietly. We'll talk technicals with Liam. I stood up and followed my father out into the cool, salt-laced night. I found him on the back porch, a silhouette against the faint moonlight reflecting off the sea. He was gripping the railing, his knuckles white, as he stared out at the dark expanse where the sky met the water. The rhythmic crash of the waves on the shore below was the only sound. I always pictured Liam taking over the company one day, he said, his voice rough, without turning around. I never, in a million years, imagined I'd be discussing its sale with you. It doesn't have to be a sale, I said softly, coming to stand beside him. It can be a continuation. An evolution. He finally turned to look at me, his face etched with a complex mix of emotions in the dim light. Like how you evolved. Beyond anything I ever thought you were capable of. The question was raw, stripped of all pretense. Before I could find an answer, he spoke again. I was out of line earlier, telling you to wait in the car. It was disrespectful. For my father, it was a monumental admission, the closest he might ever get to a direct apology. I gave a small nod of acceptance. Why didn't you tell us, Ellie? He asked, the confusion genuine. About your success? Your promotions? Your mother. She would have been so proud. Would you have been? I asked quietly. Or would you have found a way to minimize it, to explain it away, to fit it into the box you'd already built for me? He flinched, the truth of my words hitting their mark. Was I really that blind? Do you remember the robot I built when I was 17? I asked, the memory still sharp. The one with the light sensors? He frowned, searching his memory. Vaguely. I spent my entire summer on it. I taught myself a new coding language. I was so proud of it. You watched it for 30 seconds, said that's clever, and then spent the next hour helping Liam with his college application essay. The old hurt was there, a dull ache. That was the way it always was. My interests were clever. Liam's were important. A look of dawning, painful understanding crossed his face. I never saw it, he whispered. How I treated you both so differently. You told me this was a man's world, Dad. You actively told me not to pursue the one thing I was passionate about. He dragged a hand over his face, a gesture of profound weariness. I was wrong, he said, his voice cracking. So completely, spectacularly wrong. He gestured back toward the house. The president of Lumina Tech, he said, shaking his head, a note of awe in his voice. My daughter. The pride I had craved for so long was finally there, in his voice, in his eyes. And to my astonishment, it still mattered. A tightly wound not deep inside me began to loosen. I didn't do it to prove you wrong, I said, and it was the truth. I did it to prove I was right about myself. I wish I had seen the person you were becoming, he said. I was so focused on the path I had chosen for you, I never bothered to look at the one you were paving for yourself. The porch door creaked open, and my mother stepped out, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. She looked between us, her expression full of a cautious, fragile hope. Is everything all right? We're talking, Mom, I said, offering her a small, reassuring smile. Really talking. She came to my father's side, her hand finding his. Arthur called me after he learned Lumina might be interested, she confided in me. He was nervous, but also excited. He said this might be a chance. A way to reconnect with you. I looked at my father, surprised. He had the grace to look sheepish. I may have been following your career more closely than you think. I found your name on a few patent filings. I knew you were doing well there. I had no idea how well. I thought if our companies could work together, it would give us a reason to talk again. This revelation shifted the foundation of my narrative. He hadn't been ignoring me out of pure disdain. He had been watching from a distance, trapped by his own pride. I should have just called, he admitted. I should have been the father and reached out, instead of hiding behind a business deal. The door opened again. It was Liam. So, he said, trying to inject some levity into the charged atmosphere. Do we have a deal, or has this just become a very expensive family therapy session? We're coming back in, my father said. He then turned to Liam, his tone suddenly serious. What do you think, son? About the acquisition? Liam seemed taken aback to be asked so directly. He looked at me, then back at our father. I think Alara's right. The algorithm deserves a real chance and Lumina can give it that. The name on the door doesn't matter as much as the work. My father nodded slowly, a deep respect for his son's pragmatism in his eyes. And you? Would you want to work for Lumina? Liam glanced at me, a question in his eyes. Is there a place for me? Absolutely, I said, without a moment's hesitation. Liam, your work on the encryption core is groundbreaking. I'd be proud to have you on my team. A slow, genuine smile spread across my brother's face, the first one we'd shared in years. Working together, he mused. That could be interesting. My father straightened his shoulders, a flicker of his old self returning, but tempered now with a newfound humility. "Well then," he said, "let's go back inside and talk about the future." He paused and looked at me, his eyes clear and direct. "Alara, I'm sorry. I am so deeply sorry that it took all of this for me to finally see you." It was the apology I had stopped hoping for long ago. The explicit, unconditional acknowledgement of his failure. And in that moment, I felt not triumph, but a profound and quiet sense of peace. "It's not too late, Dad," I said, the words catching in my throat. "Let's go see what we can build. Together." 3 months later, I stood on the back porch of my childhood home, watching the winter sun dip below the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of lavender and rose. The quarterly family dinner had become our new ritual, an event I now anticipated with warmth instead of apprehension. "There she is," my mother's voice called from the kitchen. Just in time. My father emerged from his study not with blueprints, but with a novel in his hand. Since stepping into his advisory role, he had rediscovered hobbies he'd abandoned decades ago. He seemed lighter, the immense weight of his company lifted from his shoulders. "Alara," he said, smiling. "Liam was just telling me about the successful deployment with the new federal contract. Incredible work, both of you." The acquisition had been smooth. Vance Innovations was now the seed of Lumina's new Government Solutions division. Liam was thriving as its technical lead, and my father provided historical context and industry wisdom, his input now offered as counsel, not decree. Liam arrived a few minutes later, his arm around his new partner, a software architect from the Lumina team. The house filled with easy laughter, the conversation flowing from new recipes to market trends to plans for a weekend hiking trip. The ghosts of old tensions had been exorcised. As we gathered around the familiar oak table, I marveled at the change. My father, who once dominated every conversation, now listened more than he spoke, asking thoughtful questions. My mother, no longer a buffer for his ego, shared her opinions with a newfound confidence. And Liam and I had finally found our rhythm as siblings, a partnership built on mutual respect. "The most foolish mistake a leader can make," my father said to no one in particular as he passed the bread, "is to believe that potential only looks one way." I was so convinced it had to look like me, I almost missed it entirely. He glanced at me, his eyes full of a quiet pride that no longer needed to be announced with a booming voice. Over dessert, my mother mentioned that a young woman in her book club, a college freshman studying computer science, was feeling discouraged. "I was thinking, Alara," she said, "perhaps you could talk to her? Tell her your story." "Of course," I said immediately, a poignant sense of circularity washing over me. "We could offer her a summer internship," Liam added. "Start building the next generation." My father beamed. "The next generation of brilliant women in tech," he said, his words a direct refutation of his past self. "Maybe one of them will be president of Lumina someday." As the evening wound down, my father walked me to my car. The night was crisp and cold, the stars brilliant in the clear sky. "You know," he said, his hands in his pockets, "the hardest part of all this wasn't admitting I was wrong. The hardest part was realizing how much I missed. How many years I spent not knowing my own daughter." I leaned in and hugged him, a gesture that now felt natural and easy. "But you know me now," I said. "Yes," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I do. And I couldn't be prouder." Driving back down the coast toward Portland, the city lights a warm glow on the horizon, I reflected on the winding path that had led me back here. The validation I had spent so many years chasing from my father had turned out to be less important than the validation I had learned to give myself. My success wasn't a weapon I had used against him, it was a bridge I had built back to myself. And in doing so, I had, unexpectedly, created a space where my family could meet me, on new ground, ready to build something real and lasting, together. The young woman who had been sent to wait in the car had not only claimed her seat at the table, she had learned that true power lies not in proving others wrong, but in having the courage and grace to help them see the right.